You know, in the preamble of our Constitution, our forefathers, look, they knew we didn't have everything right. They didn't let perfect be the enemy of good enough when we started this nation. And we all know some of the challenges that we've had to overcome, and we're still trying to overcome every single day. But in that preamble, I like to seize on this one phrase that says, in order to form a more perfect union. And so with that was the challenge that they gave every American, in order to form a more perfect union. And that's about living up to our best selves, living up to the best that we can be every day. And unlike any community that we have in our country, I would say that the disability community, the disabled community, has been uniquely and consistently across all communities had the toughest way to go, discriminated, if you will, challenged the most, regardless of communities. And so I would say that we have a lot of work to do. And so as we think about access, as leaders, as followers, it's really about the dignity and respect that we consistently live by. Not because someone looks like me or doesn't look like me, or we had the same alma mater, or we're from the same state. Whatever we draw our commonalities with, and I'm okay with that. We ought to be okay with finding what we're familiar with. But how do we live that? Do we allow those biases to impede? Do we allow those biases that we have implicit? Do we allow those to prevent us from living up to our best selves? Well, as a soldier in the Army, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution, but in a more personal level, I felt that those young men and women that raised their right hand to support and defend our Constitution, to support our way of life, I had the ultimate responsibility of making sure that they could be their best selves, that they could, and I didn't have time to pick favorites. I didn't have time to figure out who I liked and who I didn't like. We were all going to serve our nation, and I wanted to create an environment where we could all flourish, where we could all be our best selves. And that's what our challenge is as leaders, is to create that environment where we can truly, truly live up to our best selves. Well, it's been nearly 17 years next month, a fateful day in May 7th of 2007. I can remember that day like yesterday because I was returning first from a memorial service for two young men. First Lieutenant Ryan Jones and Specialist Armando Sunson were two men that were part of the brigade that I was part of from Fort Riley, Kansas, who paid in full measure just 3 days before. I had the honor of attending a short memorial service. Well, I remember that day because I was struggling with their sacrifice, trying to sort out whether or not we were making a difference halfway around the world in a very violent and unstable environment in Baghdad, Iraq. Every single day it felt like a U.S. service member, someone with an American flag on their right shoulder, was paying with their lives. And I was wondering if we were making a difference, and my organization was a difference, and was this worth it? So after the memorial service and a 4-vehicle patrol, I would head back to my headquarters, leaving Forward Operating Base Falcon, heading back to Liberty. Shortly after leaving Falcon, my vehicle was struck by a command-detonated improvised explosive device. It wasn't random, I was targeted. The blast lifted my 15,000-pound armored vehicle off the road and ejected me out of the vehicle, where I can remember flying through the air and hitting the ground and coming to a rolling stop on my back. I knew exactly what it was. It was actually the second time that I'd been in a vehicle that had been hit by a roadside bomb, but this time was very different. My anger and outrage very quickly shifted to realizing that I was gravely wounded and I could not get up. And the last thing that I would say was, God, I do not want to die in this country, and I lost consciousness. Amen. But my teammates, men like First Sergeant Frederick Johnson, the senior non-commissioned officer in my patrol, who would be the first to arrive at my vehicle and was the one that recognized that I was missing, and he would locate me about a football field from where my vehicle stopped. I was already unconscious, lying in a pool of my blood, where he began to resuscitate me. And a young private named Eric Brown would put the tourniquets on my legs, a fact that the doctors say saved my life. Now, what is special about this young man was that he was not a medic. He wasn't a school-trained medic in my organization. He was actually the NBC specialist, or nuclear, biological, and chemical specialist. We call it nobody cares, right? But as fate would have it, the medic that was assigned in my personal security detachment, he slipped on some ice and broke his ankle, and he couldn't deploy with us immediately. So we did what any organization would do. We asked for a replacement medic, and naturally they didn't have one. My headquarters first sergeant would recommend and send Private Brown to a 2-week, I say again, a 2-week emergency medical training course at Kansas State University, right outside of Fort Riley, Kansas. He would finish this course just days before we were going to deploy. And they came to me with the recommendation of putting him in one of my subordinate platoons and bringing up a medic for myself, bringing up a school-trained medic or an MOS medic for myself. But I said no. First, on the basis of not really wanting to upset all the teamwork that we had focused on and getting ready for this deployment. But more personally for me, I felt if this young man was good enough for my soldiers, then he was good enough for me. And so I kept him as my medic. Never could I have imagined that I would be wounded. But that night, just to give you a perspective of first my injuries, but more significantly the environment that we were operating in. In those first 4 to 6 hours after I was wounded, I would go through 129 pints of blood and die 6 times that evening. But more significantly, I will tell you that 131 U.S. service members would pay with their lives in the month of May of 2007 alone, and more than 10 times that number were significantly wounded like myself. And so I'm here to tell you that I'm here today because my team saved my life. I would arrive here in Washington, D.C. at Walter Reed Army Medical Center on the 11th of May, just 4 days after being wounded, intubated on a feeding tube in an induced coma, going through surgery every other day to repair my blood vessels and clean up my wounds. Just a week back, on the 18th of May, while I was in the intensive care, the blood vessels in my left leg could no longer sustain blood flow, and I started to bleed to death. An ICU nurse would take off her belt and put a fuel expedient tourniquet on my leg, and they took me into surgery and had to amputate my left leg above the knee to save my life. The next day, guess what? The same thing happened to my right leg, but this time the doctors were one step ahead. And they actually would pull a vein from my left bicep and they put it in my right leg, so they were able to save my right leg. Well, by this time, I was out of my induced coma and able to communicate with the doctors. I was obviously on a lot of drugs, if you can imagine, legal ones if you're here in D.C. But able to communicate with the doctors, and ultimately I would make the decision for the doctors to amputate my right leg. I was frankly tired of surgery, but more significantly, I just wanted to get on with my life, and I figured my quality of life would be better as you see me now, or in 2 prosthetics. And so on the 24th of May, the doctors, in fact, amputated my right leg above the knee. Well, when I came out of that surgery, I got some more great news. They had decided to re-x-ray my right arm because I had been complaining about it. And so when I came out of that surgery, I found out that not only was the radial head of my elbow broken, but my upper bicep was my upper bicep in my right arm was broken. And that would require some surgery to repair it. And about a week later, I in fact had that surgery on my right arm. Unfortunately, I had some complications from that surgery. I not only sustained a radial nerve damage, which at the time prevented me from picking up the right wrist or bending my right wrist or my right hand, but ulnar nerve damage, which to this day prevents the full use of my fingers on my right hand. So at this point, about 3 months after being wounded, or not 3 months, just 6 weeks after being wounded, I'm down to 1 limb. My non-dominant left arm and hand was all that I could use. I was about 215 pounds before I was wounded. I was now down to about 145 pounds. Again, needing assistance or help with literally every aspect of my daily life. And I will tell you, it was probably the straw that broke the camel's back when I lost the use of the function of my right arm and hand. I absolutely did not want to be a burden on anyone. I didn't want to be a burden on my family or anyone else. And I would tell you, that's when I tried to quit. I tried to give up. It was more than I believed that I could take. But I never quit in my life. My life has been a fight from the very beginning. And as bad and as bleak as it looked, I couldn't quit now. And that's when I decided that I was just going to live my life. My legs were gone, so there was no need in me looking back at yesterday. And I actually had no vision of a future. I had no vision and I had no idea where my life was going to go. All I knew was that I could only live the day I was in. All I knew was I could only be the best that I could be every day. And I rededicated my life to just that simple cause of living my best life every day. If anyone knew that tomorrow wasn't promised, I certainly appreciated that every single one of us in here one day will not have a tomorrow. So why worry about that? Let me just live my best life today. And so I began, as we started talking about my future, and they were talking about medically retiring me and putting me off the pasture, I said no. I mean, I was a lieutenant colonel, and I'm like, you guys are not really paying me for how fast I could run. You're paying me for what's up here and what's in here. And I started to push back and inquire about my being able to continue to serve. And along the way, I had so many people that from all walks of my life, from the past, from high school, from college, and throughout my Army career, that were there to cushion my blow, the shock of this devastating injuries to myself and to my family. And one such individual named Mike Sullivan, a classmate and a teammate, who happened to be a coach for the New York Football Giants, who'd come to visit me in the hospital when I was still an inpatient that summer. Well, he said, he reminded me that he would be back in town when the Giants would come to play the then Washington Redskins, and he asked me if I wanted to attend the game, and I said, sure. So true to his word, the third week of the season, the Giants had started out 0-2, played horrible football, and coming to town to play the undefeated Washington Redskins. Well, Mike called me up and asked me if I wanted to come to the game, and I said sure. He asked me how many tickets I needed, and I let him know that I needed 4 to cover the rest of my family, and he said sure, no problem. Well, he called me back on a Tuesday the next day to ask me if I would be willing to speak to the New York Giants. They were not performing very well, and I remember thinking, you set me up. You offered me tickets, and now he wants me to talk to the team. Well, realize this: I'd never spoken publicly to any organization outside the Army, but my teammate asked me to do something. I said sure. Well, that Saturday, after my kids' Pop Warner football game, my wife is driving me from Fort Belvoir to downtown D.C. to meet up with the Giants, and I've got a blank 3x5 card in my hand, and she's stressing me out, asking me what I'm going to talk about, and I have no idea. And I shared a little bit of what I'm sharing with you all this morning in a much more brief manner, probably a 15 or 20-minute speech, but it was the first one I had ever done, and I didn't even know it was a drop the mic moment because Coach Coughlin dismissed the team after I spoke. All the other meetings they had on the schedule, they dismissed for the evening, and I literally would go into the team, the team dining room, and I got some dinner, and Plexico Burst sat down next to me, and we were from the same hometown, and we chatted for a little bit, and then I went home. Well, the next day, I drive back to the stadium to FedEx Field with my family, and they decided to put me on the sidelines instead of having me in the stands. And one of my children took a half a piece to be down there to help me moving around. And I remember going to the locker room at halftime. It was the Washington Redskins 14, the New York Giants 3. And I'm thinking, boy, there's my motivational speaking career, already off to a great start. But the Giants would ultimately rally, winning the game 24-17. I know that's not a popular story in these parts, but anyway, the Giants would end up winning the game, and it would be the first of 11 consecutive road victories, which is still a record today. 11 consecutive road victories in which the Giants beat the undefeated New England Patriots in Super Bowl 42, where I got a chance to talk with the Giants one more time the night before that game. And what I shared with them is that if I could be anywhere in the world right now, it would be back with my soldiers, but I would take every single one of them with me because I had watched them become a team. And so I'm not only the owner of one Super Bowl ring, but we just to make sure it wasn't a fluke, we went back and we beat the Patriots again in Super Bowl 46. So I'm 2-0 against the GOAT. So thank you. But more significantly, what I'm most proud of was that I was able to serve for almost an additional 8 years post-injury. What I say to those that are in the disabled community is that every day I get up, I go to work, I'm involved in whatever I did for 8 years after being wounded. I got up and I put my uniform on. And so how am I disabled? if I'm doing everything that everybody else does with less? And so as we look at those that are different from us, as we look at those that have challenges, guess what? We all have challenges. And we all stand to learn from each other when we embrace those challenges. That's part of being our best. That's part of living up to our best. I understood for my life to continue, I was going to have to live up to being my best. I didn't know what it looked like. I didn't know what it felt like. But you know what? None of us truly do know what life has in store for us. I can guarantee you that most of us will encounter challenges in our lives. And every day we have a chance to build on that DNA that we will draw on when we're faced with those kind of challenges. And we build that DNA, we build that character by living up to our best selves. Every single one of us in here knows when we fall short to living up to our best selves. All we got to do is just look in the mirror. Did we have an opportunity to be our best selves? Was I short? Did I cut somebody off? Did I not want to listen? Did I not want to open my heart? Did I not want to open my humanity? We're all guilty of it. I'm guilty of it too. But hopefully there's more days. Hopefully there's a lot more days built into that I live up to my best self. That I live up to my best self.